I don't go around telling people I have ADHD, but ironically, everyone else goes around telling me I have ADHD. I had pretty much a decade of consistent psychiatrists, mental health practitioners, hospitalized a couple of times, all sorts of things. We've got ourselves into a strange position of believing that we shouldn't necessarily be thriving. I'm here to say that that is not correct. In my 30s, I've had next to zero mental health problems. The 20-year-old version of me wouldn't be able to believe that. I'm a completely different person. But what's changed is...
We've had such a great response to the podcast, and so many of you have been in touch asking what you can do to help. It's really simple. Just follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That way we can reach more people, and that way we can celebrate these great minds that think differently. Our next guest is a serial entrepreneur, podcast host, and passionate mental health advocate. Dan Murray-Serter is the co-founder of Heights, Europe's leading brain and gut supplement company, born from his personal struggles with insomnia, anxiety, and depression. From the public failure of his first startup, Grabble, to building a thriving brain care brand, Dan's journey is a testament to resilience, transformation, and growth. Today, we explore self-diagnosis, entrepreneurship, and ADHD. Let's dive in. Let's see how great minds think differently. Tell me about your brain.
It's very scatty. It's quick-witted. So it's always trying to work out what the next joke is and stuff, which actually is very, very typical ADHD behavior. It'll take me 20 minutes to leave the house because of all the things that I forgot in the other room. And I'm just going around my house like it's a puzzle every single morning.
Okay.
Drives my wife insane, which is so completely reasonable because it's annoying. It's annoying for me. So I'm sure it's annoying for her. And there's that meme with the whole, my brain is like my computer. I've got 1,500 tabs open. I don't know which one the music's playing from. That's the most relatable meme in the world for me.
Okay.
I totally relate to that. And, because of all of these things, because I have really good awareness of all of these incredibly frustrating shortcomings that are quite draining, the other side of my brain is many years ago, I was suffering from really poor mental health problems. So basically all throughout my 20s, really bad, multiple mental health problems, bulimia, anxiety, but chronic anxiety, panic attacks, depression, insomnia.
And where was all that coming from?
Well, I mean, the different reasons, and we can get into it. But at some point, mostly the depression, I was like, I can't literally live like this. I'm not saying I was suicidal, but I can't live like this. This is just not a thing that I can just go for with the rest of my life. And I sort of decided I'm going to do something about this. And I discovered this concept called neuroplasticity, which is the very simple concept that your brain can change. You're not stuck with the brain you were born with, and you can change it. That doesn't mean that you can get rid of everything, but it certainly means you don't need to be trapped by the current feeling that you have today.
Yes, it's not concrete.
Totally. And I found that to the exact point, it's plasticity, right? So and it's a concept. It's not actually plastic, your brain, but the idea that you can mold it through actions was so powerful to me. And I just went down a massive rabbit hole on learning about neuroplasticity, learning about the idea that what you choose to input into your brain will define the outputs. I was living in a repetitive fashion of working too hard, drinking a lot and going out and drowning my sorrows and, and socializing and a bunch of other things, but just on a constant cycle of work, going out, and feeling worse and worse and worse and worse and not doing anything about it. And so I realized that there was probably just not a positive cycle for me, and that input was driving a really poor output. And so it was creating a habit loop that was comfortable and I was getting used to, but it wasn't serving me. And it certainly wasn't going to take me to good places.
And was there a day? Was there a moment?
I'd just been going through my first experience of depression, and I was sure it was going to end.
Okay.
I just didn't know when it was going to end. And I didn't want to take antidepressants because I knew I had some antidepressants, but they hadn't really helped me. They made me feel better.
Sure.
But they didn't help me understand how I'd get out of feeling depressed. And I was just being really open at this dinner, explaining to people, I don't know when it's going to end, but I know that it will. And someone did say to me, you're stuck with the brain you're born with. That's very Freudian. And I was like, yes, I'm familiar with that, etc. And they're like, well, that's not necessarily true. There's a guy called Martin Seligman, who is the founding father of a new wave of psychology called positive psychology. And positive psychology is all about what you can do to learn how to trick your brain, ultimately to become a different person. And it is as simple as reading and listening to things that are positive and just changing your attitude to stuff. And actually, most of it starts from a practice of gratitude.
Change the input.
Exactly. So what normal people might do in this situation is, read a book or whatever. But I found that he had an online course at the University of Pennsylvania where he's a professor, which was you could get a diploma in positive psychology. So I started doing that at night instead of going out. And I just went and took myself and did this course. So I basically have this diploma, but in positive psychology. The founding principle of it is ultimately in psychology, most psychology is not very scientifically sound. It is theory. Neuroscience is very scientifically sound, right? And so the difference over time with psychology, which is smart people trying to ponder what might be up with you, which is kind of guesswork and then turning it into theory. Neuroscience, from the 60s and 70s with MRIs and then fMRIs, were able to sort of actually take scans of your brain and see, does this sort of check out? And one of the first things that they were ever able to prove, was the concept of neuroplasticity through MRI scans and fMRI scans, which was essentially, yes, you can literally change your brain with your thoughts by trying to create behavior change. And secondly, gratitude. So the practice, what Martin Seligman called the three things. This is three things that went well today. That's one of the most powerful things you can do to change your brain. That would usually be stuck in the realm of pseudoscience, but thanks to the timing of it, they were able to prove it with scans as well. And so the three things which went well today, which is a gratitude practice from Martin Seligman of positive psychology, that is one of the first scientifically proven psychological concepts to ever exist. And why that really motivated me is because I like science. So as soon as I sort of had this sort of validation of discovering this stuff and being like, oh, right, this is true, I just got really into it. And I started practicing gratitude, started to actively work on changing my inputs and my brain. I kind of just got away with the things I was doing. I stopped doom scrolling Netflix and social. And actually with social, I started to learn as well. It isn't that social's bad. I just got to stop following people that make me feel jealous and make me feel I want their life and just, start following positive people and people that would inspire me and make me think differently and all of that kind of stuff. So it was a very powerful experience because I do believe that anyone can do it, right? And I think this is the thing. You're not stuck with the brain you're born with. You can change it. It just takes work. And the way to do that is to sort of recognize that you're in a negative pattern. Sometimes your friends want to keep you in that pattern as well, not because they don't like you, but because they are not comfortable with themselves and you exist in their reality as well. But you've got to separate yourself out from their beliefs and make sure you are responsible for your own happiness and you are responsible for where your life is going. I managed to get out of this doom cycle by creating positive inputs. And the first habit that I picked up properly was gratitude. And the second one was a daily walk for 10 minutes. And now I walk hours a day. I pretty much try to put walking, not every day, because sometimes it's impossible and I don't like to do anything toxically. But if I can do at least 10,000 steps, up to 20,000, if I can walk somewhere, I will. That all started with just 10 minutes a day. I'd already tried to, like everyone, start 3 or 4 habits all at the same time and realize I didn't do any of them. And I quickly recognized that about myself and I started again.
And what did you learn about your brain?
I suppose my brain's like anyone else's brain in the sense of you overcommit. You assume that you can do loads of things all at the same time. You have this moment where you're like, right, I'm going to change. And then you try and change too much too fast and none of it works. Where my brain serves me well is I am very, very resilient and I don't give up on stuff. So I'm very persistent. If I want to get something done, I'll get it done. And I've learned that often in the past, having failed a business as well, I've learned some of the mistakes that happen when you try and make things happen too fast against a run of reality. Because your brain is obsessing that this thing needs to happen in an unrealistic timeline. And so it can create failure. I've also got the benefit of hindsight of life experience of when I did these things, this happened. And it doesn't mean that those things were wrong. It means that the way that I approached it was wrong. And therefore, the same approach, but a longer time frame, a bit more patience, but the same persistence, the same ability to get myself back up. And if that habit didn't work, try a different way, constantly working on myself to make sure that I'm not the person I was is so important to me. And I have to say, like, pretty much in my 30s, I've had next to zero mental health problems. The 20-year-old version of me wouldn't be able to believe that. I had pretty much a decade of consistent psychiatrists, mental health practitioners, hospitalized a couple of times, all sorts of things, because I'm a completely different person. But what's changed is the time frame I gave myself to do these things and giving myself some patience to get through them.
And two things on that. One, I first went to rehab 21 years ago, and the single best piece of advice someone gave me in a desert in Arizona, of all places.
Don't lick that cactus.
Don't lick that cactus. The only way to build self-esteem is through esteemable acts. And that is, like, I'm such a big fan of action, and that you can literally act your way out of things.
Totally.
That really
perception
resonates.
becomes reality, right?
100%.
And sometimes you see that in a very negative way. You can see that, people overinflate their narrative and their story, and the rest of the world just kind of goes, fair enough, and just sort of gives in. And that perception becomes a reality.
Yes.
But also in an empowering way for yourself. If you don't like your narrative and the story you're running with, you got to stop blaming everyone else.
Yep.
No one else is going to change your narrative. Only you can. And sometimes the best way to do that is to remove yourself from the group of people that are holding you in that narrative, and remove yourself from the environment or the same habits and loops that are causing the same cycle and same pattern. Like, the only person that can make those changes is you. And I do think, I talk to a lot of people about mental health. One of the most complicated things we have is people are very fragile, and it sounds very entrepreneurial, or like, to just be like, build resilience. How does one build resilience? You kind of like, you can't just, it's very hard. I mean, maybe put yourself in the army. That would probably help you build resilience.
Fail.
Do a marathon, totally. Run a business. And that's why running a business is such incredible training for mental health, because the failure rate is so common.
Yep.
And hearing no is so common.
Yep.
That of course you break down, upset and disappointed with yourself the first 10, 50, 100 times. But after a while, you're like, well, all right, it's just another no, back on it then. And I do feel like that is a big challenge that we have in society, which is a lot of people who suffer from mental health problems are too focused on giving up quickly, not understanding how to take that feedback loop and do something with it, and like fundamentally victimize themselves to the nth degree. And it's not, I don't have sympathy for it. It's that I literally don't believe that's ever going to help them get out of that cycle.
Yeah.
And that's what's really hard.
I'm not particularly sympathetic either, in the sense of take action. It is your responsibility.
Yeah. Yoda, do or do not, there is no try.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm unsympathetic to this stuff, because I have a lot of friends that I see do this, and I am sympathetic to them because I've been that person too. I feel frustrated is a much better answer, because you want to shake them because you were them.
Yep.
And so you know that this stuff didn't help. 2 amazing books I think everyone should read, because they are basically the opposing arguments, which I love to do. So 2 books, The Body Keeps the Score, which I imagine you might have read.
I haven't read. No.
Okay, superb. And then Bad Therapy.
Haven't read.
Okay, so The Body Keeps the Score fundamental concept is we all have trauma. There's big trauma and little trauma, so what they call big T trauma and little t trauma. Fundamental concept in the book as well, which is incredible. The author of it is the person who was right at the forefront and start of the mental health epidemic, where they started giving people SSRIs, so antidepressants, and fundamentally questioned the entire time, is this a good idea? You go into a doctor and you tell them some things, instead of telling you, hey, take these supplements or try this diet or go to a psychiatrist or whatever, the first thing they do is give you pharmaceuticals. And that's not their fault. That's how it's trained.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of the book that you learn, this is how it all started. So it's really interesting history. If you're into mental health, it is the history of how we got there.
And it makes total sense from an efficiency perspective.
It totally does.
Don't take months. Don't
completely.
Just take this.
If you're a Stoic, like I am a Stoic, I like Stoic philosophy. My dad was a Stoic. I believe that's helpful for me. You won't recognize big T trauma ever. So you need, because you've seen someone else have something that you consider to be a big trauma, and you're like, wow, that person really suffered. Everything I've gone through is nothing compared. So I'll only associate things with little t trauma. And little t traumas you will just ignore, because you're like, it's just a little trauma. It's really not a big deal. So like my dad passed away, very painfully and all of this kind of stuff. And it really screwed me up. This is over a decade ago. But I totally just absorbed that as a little t trauma and compartmentalized it. And reading this book really helped me understand, okay, that's a big T trauma in my life. It's just not compared to the worst thing that ever happened to someone I've met. That's not how trauma works. I shouldn't be comparing traumas. I should be dealing with my own shit.
Same with ADHD, neurodivergence, etc. We love
resolve
these scales.
Totally. And you're only living in your own body. So you should resolve your own stuff and make sure that you're not being toxic to yourself or other people around you because you've got unresolved stuff. So it's a really great book talking about trauma and essentially how therapy can really help. Bad therapy is kind of the opposite and actually calls out that book specifically and that author specifically for fetishizing the overstated self-importance of the I.
Yes.
That everyone is in therapy. If the body keeps the score's fundamental question is essentially, if mental health drugs, if SSRIs are so good, why has mental health crisis only risen and risen and risen on exponential levels, even though that is the solution that has been normalized? So if they worked, why has it got 10 times worse? Bad therapy's fundamental concept is actually exactly the same, which is if therapy worked, why has it got 10 times worse since normalizing therapy everywhere? And what she does, which is incredible, she's like an incredible journalist. So she does a sort of expose, especially in American schools, of everyone becoming a therapist, whether they're accredited or not. And actually keeping parents completely locked out of conversations that therapists are having in school every day with kids. She has this very realistic and practical thing that I completely resonate with, having also been the person doing this too, which is that maybe it really isn't that helpful for your mental health to constantly think about yourself.
100%.
Maybe the path through to better mental health is actually letting go of your self-importance, your self-worth, and your ego, and perhaps thinking about other people might be a much better path through for our mental health. She articulates it so well that, like all things, I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle of these two books. And they're both incredible, and I recommend everyone to read them. They're both amazing. And
it's not absolute. It's not
absolute.
Be on pills the rest of your life. Or be in therapy for the rest of your life.
Exactly. My mum's still on antidepressants, and they've really helped her. So I don't demonize any of this stuff at all. But on a personal level, as someone with high agency and a really strong commitment to try and figure out how to be a happy functioning person with a very hyperactive and overactive brain and all of this kind of stuff, it's my responsibility to find a good way forward for myself that works. And ideally not take pharmaceuticals, and ideally not spend all my time in therapy talking about myself, trying to just live a normal balanced life through other means. I did find her articulation of that so powerful, because actually I'm sure you can relate to a time in your life where you did spend all your time thinking about yourself and it didn't really make you any happier.
Oh my God, I was a heroin addict. And so up until I was 25, I was in the constant cycle from 9 years old, starting to see psychiatrists, rehabs, therapy, NA, AA, this whole vicious cycle. And then it got to a point where I'd had enough and I wanted to do things differently. No therapy, no pills, nothing. I just got on and lived my life and took the right action to look after myself. And so I'm totally with you that we can overanalyze stuff and we can, be so inward looking that we end up paralyzed by it and actually in a worse place than where we started.
100%.
And I think now we have access to all this information and people telling us they want to help us with this app or whatever, it's bamboozling.
But so then to the other side, you were talking about your daughters earlier, like when you're helping your daughters with their homework or spending time with them, is that not the happiest you are?
I'm not thinking about work. I'm not thinking about anything else.
It's so interesting, but you just have to reflect on your own life. The moments where you're helping someone else, you're really just focused on helping the other person. You're not giving it too much thought. You're just focused on helping the other person. Your mind's pretty calm. You're not in some kind of over anxious mental health issue. It's just, you're sort of in this very lovely flow. And then you sort of come away from it you go back to your own problems and how much you've got to do today and all of the things and me again, and it all starts again. So all of that really helps me understand that obviously not all therapy is bad in any kind of way, but like that idea that we've completely normalized constantly talking about your problems, that's probably not a good thing.
Why do you think ADHD and entrepreneurship are such good friends?
It is funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like ADHD is this sort of ironic get done thing where it's so the kind of brain for getting done, but then in the doing you realize you've got nothing done. It's just really odd. I think the multitasking thing, so anytime you ever hear someone talk about multitasking, which is the worst thing anyone could do, and so every good entrepreneur knows not to multitask. But of course, all the entrepreneurs also have ADHD, and so they all multitask. There's just this really natural fit, isn't there? So I can only speak from my experience. Like I'm not in any kind of way a specialist at anything. Every single person I work with is better than me at the thing that they do. And that's not me being modest. I'm so useless a thing.
No, but that's you knowing what you are good at and what you're not good at.
I'm amazing at doing lots of things quite well. So I can get a million things off the ground. I just, I'm a good starter, I'm a bad finisher. But in reality, I think the ability to just pick things up and just run with it with curious intensity, that feels very, you feel like you're kind of in flow with your ADHD with that.
You can get a long way very fast.
Totally. And I spoke to you about this the other day. I've tried all of the mental health ADHD medication. And, I know which ones I think are better than others for me. But regardless, on most days, I feel like my ADHD is working for me, not against me. Most days, the amount of stuff, I look at my calendar and I'm like, it's going to serve me, to be honest. There's very few days, like I'm talking a couple of times a year, where I really, truly believe that I need my brain to not be the way it is. On those days, I'll use medication, and it's increasingly rare.
And why do you think that is?
I think maybe also getting more comfortable in my own skin and not giving myself a hard time on who I am.
Yeah, I am.
I think I used to want to be different, but I'm all right with it now.
And I would be really horrible about my brain. I'd be really harsh and critical of my thoughts, my actions, my brain. And for me, getting assessed and initially understanding that I was autistic, like this weight came off. That just meant like life's all of my questions about why I do things the way I do them.
Right.
Suddenly had an answer. And so all it did, gave me an explanation. And not an excuse, but it gave me an explanation. And ultimately, it gave me something that I could then go and learn about. I felt incredibly empowered by being informed because I didn't know before. And my concept of autism pre-diagnosis was, the Rain Man, that's it. But you're not officially diagnosed. Why is that?
Basically, every health professional I work with tells me I have ADHD. I've been told for the last decade. My wife tells me. And I went to, even this summer, I went to a couple of talks on ADHD, like group talks. Do you have ADHD? Let's talk about et cetera, et cetera. And it's all very relatable. But about a year ago, so our head of nutrition at Heights has ADHD, and our head of customer experience, who was our first ever employee, Jules, she's got ADHD. So I have two people in the team who are diagnosed ADHD, who work with me, who are like, you obviously have ADHD, you just go and do it. But Sophie especially, because Sophie formulates our products. And so she knows a lot about ADHD, and she knows a lot about vitamins and ADHD, like a lot. Yes. She's a lecturer at King's and all of this stuff. So she's a real font of knowledge. But I went to the NHS to go do my ADHD consultation, and I sort of felt like I thought that it was maybe even a test. You go and have your consultation, they ask you a bunch of questions, you answer them honestly, and they're like, cool, yeah, sounds like you might have it. Here are some forms. And you're like, okay, fair enough. And then you get the forms, and there's so many, and you look at it, and it's going to take hours. And you're like, aha, the test is, if you can finish these forms, you don't have ADHD. Because no one with ADHD can surely finish those forms. Like, no way. They are absurd. Like, I genuinely don't know, or maybe I haven't applied to enough stuff. I don't know anything else in my whole entire life before that's had such an over-the-top assessment of the thing. They sat on my desk for months and months and months. I'd start a page, obviously not finish the page, and I would just do something else. And That would go on for ages. I never finished them. I ended up just getting really wound up looking at these forms. So I put them in a drawer, never to be looked at again. And then I went and looked at the private accreditation thing. And I was about to do it. I was about to spend whatever it was. Maybe it's $2,000 or something.
Yeah,
it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. And I was about to do it. And then I just thought to myself, hold on a second. In reality, I've got the ADHD medication. I already don't take it because I used to. And also when I was starting up Heights, there were days where I had to get something done, right? And I could not rely on my brain. If it happens tomorrow, that was not a thing.
Yeah.
So there was a period in my life where modafinil and Ritalin, particularly, I found very, very helpful. And I had friends who got them for me, and that was nice and easy. And I took them when I needed them, and it was frequent. Now, I need that once or twice a year. So I was about to spend $2,000 to basically get medication that I wasn't really going to take so that I could, tell myself I had something that everyone else already tells me I have.
By the way, then it's another £100 a month for the medication.
Oh, is it really? Which I wouldn't take.
Privately.
Yeah. And I wouldn't take it. And then I was just kind of like, okay, and then it might be helpful with my wife because she's patient with my behaviors on it. But she's already also like, you obviously have it. So I talked to her about it. I was like, should I do it? She's just like, but it's just so obvious you do. So really, why spend $2,000 on this? I was like, it is true. Like, why do it? If someone actually wanted to take me through the process, all of that kind of stuff, yeah, I would totally do it. But she has a point. Like, am I going to wait 2-3 years for a diagnosis I can't really do anything with unless I'm going to really rely on the medication? No. Am I going to spend $2,000 on that? I mean, I've got a daughter. Am I going to waste $2,000 on this? For what? On myself? I'll just spend it on her doing stuff. So I just stopped myself in my tracks. And I'm quite glad I did. I suppose the only difference is don't go around telling people I have ADHD because I don't have an official diagnosis.
No, but
ironically, everyone else goes around telling me I have ADHD.
Well, and then you're always the last to know.
Yeah.
If you have the option of waiting up to 10 years for an ADHD assessment through the NHS, or you are not in a position or don't want to go through the equally as painful but expensive process of going privately, but you want answers and understanding and you want to take responsibility and do something about it, then self-diagnosis has never been more valid.
And that's when I think there's, like all things, there are levels. Like once you've seen and heard other people's stories about how their ADHD affects them.
It's all about impairment. Like
right.
If it's causing issues and problems.
That's kind of the thing. For me, I actually genuinely believe that on 99% of the times, my ADHD serves me.
Back in the time when you're depressed, you're anxious, insomnia, bulimia, not in a good space, and you reflect back and think about ADHD, can you see that there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Possibly.
That's the most you've paused when I've asked you a question.
Yeah, I don't usually pause.
I take that as a win, Dan.
Yeah, well done. You made me think. The challenge is reflecting on that time, the most intense thing that happened to me was the insomnia. But in reality, the most stressful thing that was happening repeatedly was panic attacks.
Okay.
So figuring out where ADHD fits into all of this, quite possibly.
And then what about school when you put an ADHD lens on it?
Yeah, also good question. I was always the naughty kid in school. The first time I ever tried Ritalin was at university, and that was the only way that I was able to sit in a library and revise. I mean, to this point, all of my performance in school was so bad every year up until my exams. And to give you the fun reality of this, I was, you have AS levels and then A levels. So I did my AS levels. I got 4 A's. But because of my performance all the year through, which is completely reasonable because I did this every single year at school, like I'm saying, I got predicted 3 B's. And so I got none of the universities that I applied for. I applied for all these different universities, Nottingham, Birmingham, Manchester, all the standard ones. None of them accepted me. The only one that accepted me was Cambridge, because Cambridge doesn't go through UCAS. You have to do your own interview process for Cambridge. So I got predicted by my own school that I would fail everything.
Yeah.
And so I got no unis and only a Cambridge offer, which obviously everyone thought was a joke. Terribly, the Cambridge University dean called up my parents on April Fool's Day.
Right.
So April 1st, I've been rejected from every uni. So the dean calls up my dad and says, I'm the dean at Magdalen College, Cambridge. I'm really pleased to offer your son a place here in the new year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, oh, fuck off, Stuart. It's not funny. And puts the phone down.
Okay.
And they had to call up again and speak to my mum, who was like, it's an actual thing.
Yes.
Anyway, they were not impressed, by the way. They didn't find it very funny. So to the point of how do I do at school, terrible all the way up until the end. Up to the point where even my own teachers never thought that I would do well in exams because that's how badly I would do.
Yeah. Let's talk about your dad. So he lost his sight when you were 7.
Yeah.
Tell me about that experience, I guess, of having a disabled parent.
Yeah.
And the impact learnings on you.
I think what I've kind of learned over time is I'm a very compassionate and very kind and thoughtful person. In general, these are like my positive sides. And I do think a lot about other people, and I think about the little things. I think about how to make someone happy or connect someone. Like, I spend time on that stuff. And I think all of that is a function of growing up with a disabled father. Because at 7, you want to go to the shops as a little boy. You're taking your dad and your dad's taking you. Like, you're holding his hand because you're a 7-year-old, but we have hand signals. Right. And so we develop these hand signals of like when to cross, when there's a car, like all of this kind of stuff. You're speaking your own little sign language, essentially. And so there is a really interesting caregiver relationship growing up as a 7-year-old. You obviously don't know any different. And you have the jealousy of your friends with their dads playing in the park. Or, I learned to ride a bike at 24 at Burning Man. And when everyone is like, what? How do you not learn to ride a bike when you're younger? I'm like, well, there's just something my dad couldn't do with me.
Yeah.
And just we didn't do it.
Yeah.
So there's all of these things that are not normal experiences that I had growing up. But then the flip side of that is you have an insane bond with that person. And they are like not just your best friend, but they very much feel like an extension of you because you spend so much time caring for and looking after them. And it's really mutual, of course, because they're your dad.
Of course.
But it's an unusual psychological relationship that you are not aware of what that's doing to you growing up. But it basically is forcing you to be a really compassionate and thoughtful person. Like from 7, you've had a 7-year-old daughter. It's not the natural thing for a 7-year-old to be thinking of other people.
Yeah.
Kids think about themselves until they get to a certain age. That's just like the world revolves around them.
Yes.
And that's not what happens as a 7-year-old if you have a disabled parent. You are naturally thinking about the other person the entire time, not because they ask you to, not because they're asking for compassion.
Sure.
They actually hate it. Of course they hate it.
Yes.
So they're basically trying to do anything they possibly can to help keep you independent.
Yes.
But you have this like inherent understanding that is them being compassionate, but not practical in reality.
And so what's that meant for your relationships as you've got older?
I am definitely very thoughtful. I'm also usually the more sensitive one in the relationship. I guess in most of these things, I'll be the person who takes more. Hurt is probably the wrong word, but like, I guess it's that you only know your own lived experience. And so to me, thinking about how someone else will feel if you do X, Y, and Z, both on the plus and the negative side, is just very natural. And so it's always been it's been a learning experience to be with other people and learn that isn't natural to them. And actually, that can be a good thing, right? Because I've got friends who are even more sensitive than me, and actually they can be fucking annoying, right? And actually being sensitive to things is fucking annoying to other people. And there is a really weird dichotomy between that and being resilient and tough and stoic too, right?
Of course.
Because I'm constantly sitting with my own feedback loop of someone says or does something to me that's not very thoughtful or how I would have done it, whatever, and it really offends and hurts me in my inside. And I'm like, no, but stiff upper lip. I'm like, why on earth is that upsetting me? So there's this really weird, like inherent behavior that I've tried to train out of myself because it doesn't serve me.
Yes.
And it isn't a positive thing, but it's deeply rooted in there. So I am lucky I have an exceptionally good role model of a father myself. And I'm also super conscious. I want to be a great role model for my daughter. And I don't necessarily think about it in terms of compassion or caregiver relationship or anything other than my dad was just a really good role model. And I think that one of the greatest things you can be in your life is a good role model to other people.
Yeah. And one thing that I lacked, even from I didn't know I was autistic and ADHD, but I didn't see anyone. I don't remember growing up kind of seeing dyslexic people or Tourette's. I don't remember seeing those role models or that representation, in the media or in books.
Yeah, now you see it a lot.
Now you see it a lot, which is for children is amazing. You know, my middle daughter seeing Simone Biles and all, you know, it is incredible on lots of different levels of just her absolutely loving gymnastics and then understanding that she has a different brain. I think that's a really important role that, it's sort of twofold, I guess, for neurodivergent parents down to their children, whether they're neurodivergent or not. Let's talk about heights. So I'm a massive fan of heights and what you're doing.
Thank you.
Got my wife on it.
You probably really appreciate the colour of the pills now I think about it.
Got Bella on it. Got anyone that will basically listen to me on it. And what I love about heights, and I'm going to ask you to talk about it in a second, but let me give you my view, is back to you talking about neuroplasticity and ultimately how you have learned to look after your brain. There are lots of ways to look after your brain, and there are lots of ways to feed, nourish our brains. And guess what? You can find the right supplements and the right things to take that can help and nourish your brain. I massively gravitated towards the fact that I am now in 2 years into wanting to help understand my brain and look after it, and actually identifying that I have this thing in my body, in my head, that is my brain. As stupid as that sounds.
Totally. It's the out of sight, out of mind thing, like, because you can't see it. It's very hard to think about it, even though it's the thing powering your thoughts.
Yeah.
It's all very meta.
It's the most important thing in your body.
Yeah.
And yet I'd never considered it. And so nourishing it and feeding it is really important. And heights and talking about brain care, which I'd never heard that phrase before. And because I love routine and I love ritual and I love repetition.
Yeah, which is also really helpful when you have ADHD.
I like it. I find it really easy to take. I find it really easy to slot into my day in the morning, and 3 months in, and I could feel the difference. Tell me why you started it.
Yeah. So what I would say on that is, A, really important you gave it 3 months. B, most people have never, ever, ever taken a supplement that works, because supplements are by design, by some sneaky design in the industry, the worst supplement in the world can make exactly the same claims and no more than the best supplement in the world. So the incentive drive is all towards, if you can say the same thing either way, you'll just make the cheapest product, because why not?
Yeah.
So most people have never actually taken a really high quality supplement, and so no one has actually felt what it feels like when you're like, oh yeah, I actually feel better. That's a very rare thing. And we also live in a world of quick fixes, right? So 3 months is the upper end of the time, but still most people do not do that because they're not interested in, I don't want to feel better on the long term. I want to feel better today, right now.
Pre-diagnosis.
Yes.
Pre-learning about my brain.
Yes, you might have been.
I wouldn't have even, it wouldn't have been relevant to me.
Yeah.
I would have switched off. I wouldn't engaged with it.
I get that.
Why did you start heights?
I had insomnia for 6 months. And so insomnia was the worst thing I ever had, because I didn't know, A, why I had it, and B, when I have a mental health problem, I go on a quest to fix it. And it isn't necessarily about the time frame, but the problem with insomnia is, if you have insomnia, it will downstream cause a lot of other issues anyway, because your brain's on fire basically with insomnia.
Yeah.
So it becomes like a ticking time bomb of stress. And also the whole process of trying to go to sleep every night when you know the night before again you couldn't, and will you finally go to sleep tonight? And then it's just a total cyclical nightmare. And so I went to the doctor, same routine, gave me sleeping pills. I was like, right, this is the SSRI thing all over again. Not going to take those. I went to a psychologist, psychiatrist, I had sleep therapy, got really into calm, but like nothing I did worked. I just carried on this path, very frustrated, because otherwise I was relatively happy in life. Ironically.
What was going on work-wise?
Well, work-wise, I'd actually shut my company down.
Okay.
And I was kind of like in this period of, so don't get me wrong, but I was like in a post upset period, if that makes sense. So like, I was technically free. And so technically not doing stuff, and technically,
Free and grieving?
Free, grieving, but relieved, because it was also my choice.
It was over.
It was over, and I was glad about that, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, and I was also, I'd met my fiance, now wife, and we were getting married, and so I was in a good place. And actually, that's why I just couldn't quite figure out, what is this problem? And so I ended up going for dinner with a friend, and I told her all of this stuff, and she said, it sounds to me like you've got a brain health problem. And I was like, what? Why? Like, I'm, 30. That doesn't seem at all possible. She's like, well, everything you're saying sounds like your brain is basically giving you an alarm signal to tell you that you've got something wrong, and you're doing the right thing, which is you're going on all these different journeys, but you haven't said nutrition once. You should go see a dietitian. So I looked up what a dietitian was. Nutritionists deal with healthy people, dietitians deal with sick people. And so a doctor, and dietitians are in the NHS, and they are medically trained nutrition professionals, whereas a nutritionist come in all sorts of sizes.
Yep.
Could be very good ones. You could also be a nutritionist after a weekend.
Yep.
So that's very different. A dietitian, it's 4 years of NHS training, and it's all about using food as medicine. So they really, really know exactly what to do. And technically what should have happened is the doctor should have said, here's sleeping pills, but also go see a dietitian. And, here's a psychiatrist. I should have been given a plethora of opportunities, and dietitian should have been one of them. But when it's your brain and mental health, doctors don't do that. They don't know about it. They don't think about it. If it's your gut, the first place they say is go to a dietitian.
Yep.
So this is the sort of frustrating experience I had, because my business partner at the time, he'd had really terrible, from stress, really terrible gut issues. He'd gone to the doctor, and they had rightly told him to go see a dietitian immediately, and it corrected his problems.
Yep.
She basically says to me, yes, it sounds like you've got nutritional deficiencies, also based on what I was telling her. I've tried all these different things. They haven't worked. So she's like, right, we've eliminated a lot of things anyway.
Yep.
You should take DHA omega-3, blueberry extract, and B vitamin complex. And the reasons being, B vitamin complex, most of us are deficient in a lot of B vitamins anyway, but ultimately it regulates your energy. Omega-3s, because your brain is 60% fat, and 90% of that fat is one compound, which is DHA omega-3. So it just sounds like you could just be deficient in that. And blueberry extract, because it is an antioxidant. It's like, you should eat 25 blueberries a day anyway, because they're an antioxidant and they're so powerful. But go take this very potent supplement. It's like giving your brain a car wash overnight, is what she said with the antioxidants. So I was like, fine. She's like, one more thing. Go to Planet Organic or Whole Foods to get these. And I was like, what? No, my business has failed, all this stuff. I'm getting married. Like, I'm not in a place to be shopping at Planet Organic, actually. And this is where it got really interesting. She was like, you can't get the quality that you need in the high street. You can't go to Boots or Holland & Barrett for this. Like, you have to go to Whole Foods or Planet Organic to get these supplements. Or Amazon, I can give you some links. But,
Sure.
You get what you pay for.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, did not know this. She was like, yes. So this is what you need to do. So I went to Planet Organics. I was living in Camden at the time. There was one there. £120 on 3 supplements. So I did it because desperate.
Of course.
And within 2-3 days, had my first night's sleep. And that quickly. And I was like, this is nuts. I can't believe I spent 6 months not knowing this. And B, it was a life-changing moment. It was a catalyst. And I went back to the dietitian and was like, I can't believe all of this. And she was not particularly emotional or sympathetic or anything. She was more like groaning and rolling her eyes, because she's like, yeah, you and every other mental health patient I have.
Yeah.
So it turns out, she said, almost half of her patients come to her with a mental health problem that she corrects with nutritional supplements. Half. Simply no one thinks about it. But, brain, body, guts, all connected.
Yep.
And it's really obvious to her, and it's really obvious to people in nutrition. It's just not really obvious to people in mental health, because everyone thinks about mind, they don't think about brain.
Yes.
But if you have an unhealthy brain, you cannot have a healthy mind.
Yes.
Because they are connected.
Yes.
And so...
we don't think about mind, nutrition.
No, we don't think about mind and brain relatability at all. And everything we think about brain, everything we think about mind is psychological.
Yes.
And everything we think
brain
about
is all
brain...
biology.
Right. So, and this was sort of the thing. She was like, at the end of the day, there's a few things that will change your biology or physiology: breath, hydration, nutrition, sleep.
Yes.
That's it.
Yep.
You do those 4 things. So she's like, if one of those things is really out, like my sleep, then this would be her first area to go to. One of these must be out.
Yeah.
So how are you breathing? How are you hydrating? How are you eating? Right. Okay. Well, let's go to that. Those would be her 3 levers. So I was like, okay, this all makes a lot of sense. I'm going to do what I do, which is be a nerd. And so I just started reading so much about nutrition and mental health. And there's endless amounts of information on PubMed. So also worth saying, because of this whole nutritionist can get a diploma in a weekend and everyone's an influencer and all this kind of stuff, I was like, no shade on anyone. I just want to go where I know it's going to be true.
Yep.
So I just went straight to PubMed, Public Medical Records, and just started reading science papers on nutrition and mental health. And there is, and this is sort of where I realized, there is literally an endless well of content there. It is endless. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of articles. So I was like, okay, I previously learned about neuroplasticity, understood about this concept of inputs drive your outputs. This has changed my life. This is a space where there's endless scientific fact that this happens. As far as I'm aware, zero consumer awareness. How many things like that are you ever going to find as an entrepreneur in your whole entire life? Because I'm not trying to create a new compound.
Sure.
But I'm just going to put things together.
Yeah.
So where am I ever going to find something that's an endless well of content opportunity, but backed by science, is totally credible, and low/no customer awareness, and something that I deeply feel passionate about that I've just experienced? And so I started writing a newsletter, and the idea was using the idea of neuroplasticity. I'm imposter syndrome, right? Going into a completely new space, scared. I was in mobile tech before. It's very different. I was like, okay, I'm never going to be a neuroscientist. I'm not going to be a nutritionist. But I am relatively good at writing. I love writing and I like communicating. And so I can be a science communicator. And all I need to do is create a cadence of myself every single week. Every Wednesday, I will spend the day researching scientifically, like what nutrients made an impact for a brain and what's the study and how do I write it in a really interesting way. And I will write it as a newsletter and I'll send it every Sunday. And I will just do that process every single week. And that process every single week, there's a saying in neuroscience, which is if you read something, you learn it once. And if you share it, you learn it twice because you cement new neural pathways.
Nice.
So I knew that by learning this every week and then rewriting it and sharing it, I was going to be going through the process of neuroplasticity in action, inputs driving outputs, and over time, compounded, I'd become not an expert like a neuroscientist, but a very aware person in the space.
Yes.
And so
you'd educated yourself.
And like you know, I need processes. I need something to commit to that I can do that is like my holy time that I do the thing. And so that became the start of Heights. We wrote a lot about mental health and a lot about neurodivergence as well, because nutrients make a massive difference. In a lot of studies, nutrients make a difference. Usually quite obvious, simple ones like B vitamins and omega-3s, nothing crazy. They actually tend to be pretty much the superpower in a lot of these, and antioxidants and vitamin D. They're like basically the main things that you would need. And they also, which is very important, really complement if you're taking SSRIs. They help the uptake of SSRIs. And they help the uptake of mental health medication quite often. So we learned a lot about this over our time. We were writing these newsletters, citing the sources, and tweeting quite often the scientist or the professor or whatever that had the, they'd written it. And so one of those times that was Sophie Medlin, one of those times that was Dr. Tara Swart. Both of them signed up to the newsletter. They were really enjoying reading it. They ended up being the first two people we ever worked with. Sophie is our head of nutrition, Tara is our chief science officer, and we all started talking about what it could look like. And Tara had a PhD in neuropharmacology. Neuropharmacology is basically literally what nutrients your brain needs in different states. Sophie is one of the leading gut health experts in the UK, but also with a clinical practice, but also with ADHD and all of this other expertise, and had done product formulations. So we kind of made the perfect foursome. We ended up getting quite a few people who, yes, had some neurodivergence and were really open-minded, is most important to say, to what solutions there might be. One of those people ended up being Stephen Fry. So Stephen Fry's neurodivergence is bipolar. So we launched in January 2020. This was our pre-launch test. Find 100 people from our newsletter that we could gift the product to and put them on a 3-month trial. And at the end of the 3 months, they'd get an email saying, if you want to sign up and pay, here's the link. I get an email from Stephen Fry. And the email says something along the lines of, Daniel, I've absolutely loved the remarkable little magic beans, I think he called them. These magic beans are absolutely incredible. They glow urine and all, because as anyone that's taken our first product, Vitals, knows, can make your urine quite fluorescent from the B vitamins. Totally normal, but they look relatively similar to your microphones. Anyway, so he's like, I've been loving all of it. And I'm pretty sure they've really helped my bipolar, but I'm pretty sure that they've made me feel even sharper, perkier in the mind, smarter, until I went on your website to buy them. And then I couldn't find a buy button. And now I'm wondering if they've worked at all. That was the whole email. It was amazing. So I responded to him, obviously being like, oh, well, we don't launch till tomorrow. So there's purposely no buy box on there. But how about this? I'll give you a code. You can put it in this little area here so that you can buy it. You could become our first customer if you'll give us a testimonial and review that we can use in perpetuity. It was like, that sounds like a fair deal. Let's do it. But he's, actually one of the poster boys in the UK of neurodivergence and mental health 101. full respect to him. He was an absolute pioneer on just being honest and owning it. A great example of someone as well who, no matter his age, no matter anything else, if he was open-minded to trying it.
But what I like is the way that you use personal stories of role models that are basically a person that we might know being vulnerable, but being themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And kind of going, I take this, it's helped me.
For these reasons.
It's easy.
Yeah.
You can do it too. It's amazing what you're doing.
Thank you. Do you know what is a real shame is that there are good intentions around this, but we are not, as not a pharmaceutical, is amazing because we have so many people with neurodivergence or ADHD or whatever, and it makes a big impact for them. And then they say it, which is amazing. But it's a really fascinating and frustrating category to be in when you know that you can help people with the thing and you can't talk about it. And yet in the meantime, if we sold a pharmaceutical, we'd be able to do all of that.
What's the difference?
Basically, in the UK, the MHRA, which is sort of the governing body, essentially has a carte blanche thing that if you're a pharmaceutical, you can make claims and you can do those things on websites where you sell your product. And if you're a supplement, you cannot.
What's the difference between a pharmaceutical and a supplement?
Pharmaceuticals have patents and they are literally integrated into the NHS like that. So, and it all goes back to doctor training as well, right? You go to a doctor with a sleep problem, here's the pill. You go to a doctor with a mental health problem, here's the pill. Who creates the pill? The pharma companies. And that's not me saying pharma companies are evil. I'm just saying that's the system. But what a doctor should do is say, hey, go see a dietitian in the NHS as well. The dietitian is informed on nutrition. That's their expertise. They would say to you, take these supplements before they'd ever say to you, take this pharmaceutical product. And if the supplements and nutrition did not work, they would then say, totally go back to your doctor and take that pharma product, for sure.
It's funny, isn't it, that, and I hope this sort of changes or maybe it is changing, and it's either that doctors change what they know and what they do, or we change who our first port of call is.
So a positive trend is people do trust experts more. That's a good thing. So the problem, I think, in this particular area is doctors are the top of the tree of expertise, and they should be for 90% of the things. The gap for doctors is they don't get trained in nutrition. And what we've learned over the last 20 years is how important lifestyle and nutrition is, but medical training has not caught up with that. So there is a separate field over here, which is dietitians, which doesn't even sound good. Like nutrition's the one that nutritionist is the thing that people know. Dietitian is the credible one. It's literally in the NHS. So dietitians are the experts for this stuff. And the dietitians would tell you to take supplements and all of the things that are right for you. Like you say as well, for mental health diagnoses, neurodivergence and stuff, it's one of those challenging things where modern understanding of things at the cutting edge, you kind of basically need to read books. You need to basically take personal agency to get up-to-date research on this stuff. Because in the system, understandably, it's very hard to change a system. It takes decades. It's behind. You should go to a doctor for your things, but just know that there are also other people like dietitians. There is a plethora of experts. And if I'd have known that my doctor didn't know about nutrition, but we've got ourselves into a strange position of believing that we should be feeling a bit meh, that we shouldn't be feeling great. We shouldn't necessarily be thriving because life is busy, life is stressful, things are hard. And so, of course, I feel this way. And I'm here to say that that is not correct. You should be feeling good. And there are interventions that you can do with your nutrition and lifestyle, relatively simple things that can actually help you feel great. Almost every single day. And that should be your de facto belief. And I think that one of the nice trends I see happening is like old school health, or the health system we've grown up with, basically generationally, was all about how to treat you when you get sick. Nowadays, we're starting to live through an experience, certainly millennials and Gen Z, which is, I mean, obviously I don't want to get sick. Forget that though. How do I feel great? I already feel good. How do I feel great? That's really the ambition. The ambition is like, how do I feel as good as I possibly can? And that is where prevention is the cure.
It's being active within that rather than waiting for something to go wrong.
Exactly.
It's taking an active role in, which sounds mental, to take an active role.
It's just taking agency for your life, right? You know, I want to feel great. And that is a totally reasonable ambition today.
That's a human right, or it should be.
So
we talked about, obviously, a high proportion of ADHDers are entrepreneurs. I think 40% of dyslexics are entrepreneurs, self-made millionaires. Like, neurodivergence and entrepreneurship goes hand in hand. What advice would you have for neurodivergent entrepreneurs who are out there who are starting something?
In my experience, the thing that holds me back a lot is my negative self-talk. So it's when my neurodivergence or when my brain essentially gets in the way of me doing a thing. And I had a plan to do the thing, but it's not my brain's day. And my brain is totally getting in my way of doing the thing. And it's now midday and I was meant to do that thing by 10, but I procrastinated for hours and hours and hours because my brain just got totally in the way. And now I've got some weird time pressure on myself I didn't have before, which is just, and I start going in a spin. Very easy to say, very hard to do, but a little bit of self-compassion. Very few things in reality can't be done a different day. And one of the things that I've had to learn to do, which is a hard trick, but learn to do, is just switch the task. If I find myself in this constant pit of procrastination, multiple things I try for this. Sometimes I think procrastination, a very polite way of saying my brain is just refusing to do it.
Yes.
Just pick a different task. And this is kind of thing, look, most work that entrepreneurs do is actually meaningless. You know, at the end of the day, that Jeff Bezos thing is so helpful. You know, most doors you go through can be reopened and very few are one way.
Yeah.
That's in an entrepreneur's life, almost all of them can be reversed.
Yes.
And like for both you and me, there's very few doing seedlip, very few, and with heights, very few. It's like once you've done it, it's in production and all the things, right? That's a good example of a door pretty much closed. It's a one-way door. You're really putting like a lot of financial pressure and strain and stuff. But the 1,000 doors that led to that moment before were ones that could be walked back and forth like multiple times.
Yep.
So know what door you're walking through, know what kind of pressure to put on yourself, know where self-compassion can play its role. And if it's not your day, don't force it. Just pick it up tomorrow.
Yeah. Love that. And love your brain.
Thank you,
Dan. Thanks for coming and sharing it with us.
That's my pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing your brain with me today.